Hey guys, I am Pixel Dan, and today we are going to check out one of the brand new Star Trek action figures from the folks over at Playmates Toys. Now, these have been out for a bit. I actually found this one at Target among some of the others, and to be perfectly honest, I wasn't sure I was going to pick these up or do a video or not, but I ended up caving and grabbing Captain Picard, with the Next Generation being my personal favorite iteration of the Star Trek franchise. The original Playmates Star Trek Next Generation figures are some of my all-time favorites. I loved them when I was growing up, and honestly, I was excited when they first announced these, but to be perfectly honest, when I started seeing the reveals, the photos I was seeing online just didn't do it for me. So I didn't know if I was going to dive in to another retro-inspired toy line. But finding them in stores, I decided to go ahead and give one a chance. So that's what we're going to do today. This is me checking this out to see if I feel like this is something that I want to pursue collecting. It's really interesting because it's definitely pulling on those nostalgic heartstrings. You can see the packaging is designed just like that original Star Trek Next Generation packaging, which is beautiful. I will say that this is a smaller card back than the originals. I don't have any vintage carded ones as a sample, but this stands about 8 inches tall and is 7.5 inches across. It's noticeable. It's noticeable that this is smaller than the card backs on the vintage toys, but still has that similar retro feel. And the figures themselves are in that same sort of 5-6 inch scale. I think the original ones were like 5 inches, so these might be pushing a little bit taller, but we'll find out once we get them out of the packaging. But you can see we also have some retro-inspired accessories in there, which is really interesting stuff. The back also very similar to the vintage. I love that we've actually got a card back with these. You know, one of the things I love, like Hasbro does a bunch of amazing retro-inspired card backs, but I hate that the backs don't look as pretty. You know, like we got great cross-sell. We've got like classic Playmates action going on here, where it's got a description for all of the included accessories, and we've got a bio card down at the bottom. We got something called a Q code. I love it says for parents only. But anyway, I just love the packaging itself. Great retro packaging. But let's open up the figure. Let's see if the figure itself is good. All right, we've got Picard outside of the packaging. You can see that the figure stands exactly 5 inches tall. Now, the originals were a little stylized, and they did stand just a little bit shorter than that, so we can see them later on, because we're definitely going to do a comparison time. In fact, I'm going to have some comparisons at the ready here that I definitely want to show you guys with this particular new version. One of the things that I think is pretty cool about this is Varner Studios is responsible for the sculpt work on these figures, which is the company that was responsible for the original Star Trek figures, among all kinds of other Playmates toy stuff like the original Ninja Turtles line. So we do have some talent on board who definitely knows the brand and knows what they're going for here. And one of the things that is a little bit different about this is, while it's technically like a retro-inspired figure, they definitely changed up the proportions and they made it a little bit more natural. You know, so the bodies aren't quite as squat, the head's not as big. It definitely looks like it's a more natural overall proportion on this figure. One of the things that was really bugging me in a lot of the photos, and it definitely looks like way in hand too, is that the hands for some reason look extra tiny. I don't know if that's just because those original ones were so stylized that the hands were big. They were kind of oversized. But I don't know, something about this still just seems like he's got tiny little hands. It looks off to me. However, the head sculpt, I actually like quite a bit, especially in person. I don't know why the photos of these didn't really seem like they were doing it for me, but in person, that's a pretty great Patrick Stewart likeness. And honestly, there's some decent deco up there, so I like it. The painted on hair isn't the best around the back. It's not sculpted, it's just painted on. So I do wish we had some sculpt work in the hair there to make that look a little bit more natural. I don't know, that's not my favorite. Face itself, though, I think the face is pretty good. Now, I do think it's worth noting that the figure itself is very lightweight feeling. The torso feels like it's a hollow plastic. So unfortunately, these don't feel as solid or as hefty as the original ones. It definitely has this very lightweight feel to it, and sometimes that gives the feeling of a cheapness to a figure. I wouldn't outright say that this guy feels cheap, but I will say that the hollow body, the lightweight, is very noticeable when you hold this figure outside of the packaging. So let's take a look at what we got with the articulation here. So that head does appear to be on a ball joint, so it looks left and right and kind of rolls around. Not a great range of movement, but it's decent. It's good enough. You got those joints at the shoulders that allow the arms to go outwards and move forwards and backwards. We got the swivels at the elbow and the bends at the elbow and swivels at the wrist there. There's nothing in the torso there. We don't even have a waist swivel with these, so this is all just a solid piece. I wish we had at least a waist swivel there. Then we've got the ball and socket joints at the thigh, so the legs can slightly go out to the sides. They can move forwards and backwards nicely. We got bends at the knees, swivels at the knees. I will say I do like it's hidden okay by the pants sculpt there, and it functions well. And then there's ankle articulation that allows the feet to move forwards and backwards. We don't really get a rocker, plus the sculpt of the pant cuffs there would hinder that anyway. So it's a decent amount of articulation. Honestly, it's a little bit better than the vintage because they did that thing in the vintage line that Playmates did a lot where there was a lot of weird stances. So at least with this guy, he's got a much more neutral pose, and the added articulation like the swivels at the elbows and everything should help you to get some better stances with these guys. Only thing really missing, I think, is something at the waist. Otherwise, I'm okay with this because it is sort of like a retro-inspired figure after all. So, accessories. The accessories are really interesting because they come straight out of the vintage line. First of all, we do have a display base, though it is worth noting this is much more of a classic Trek display base. For example, the original Next Generation figures came with display bases that looked like their actual badges, and they also had the little name stickers on them. So, they were a little bit more colorful and a little bit better looking than the current one. The current one does seem to be a bit bland, but it does have a foot peg on there, so if you want to use that, you can. Though, again, just like the vintage ones, they're a bit, they don't position great underneath the feet, but you can find a good place to do it. There you go, just like that. And that way, that'll help them keep standing, which is always nice. So then we have the little desktop computer. It looks to be exactly the same as the vintage mold. However, this time it's just molded in black plastic and there's no decal on the screen. So again, I can do an accessory comparison time because here's the one that came with the vintage figure. And it does appear to be the same mold, which is really interesting. But you can see that the vintage one molded in like a silvery plastic that's got a bit of a shine to it and has a great decal on there. So I am bummed that we lost out on the decal on the new one there. And then, same can be said for all of the other accessories. The tricorder, the little data pad there, and the Type 1 phaser are all just like that of the vintage. So we got the tricorder there. Let me show you. This is the newer data pad right here. And again, there's nothing on it. Here's the one that came with the vintage Picard that at least had a label on there so that the screen was lit up. And then the phaser on the new ones are just like the old ones, though there are some color differences. The old one had a bit of a shinier plastic, shinier silver, and then it was a brighter red on the phaser beam. Really interesting that they decided to maintain the vintage accessories while the figures themselves are a bit more realistic, especially with the phasers and the phaser beams, because I think there could be a lot of collectors who don't want the beams blasting off their phasers. They want to be able to pose their figures holding the weapons without the beams. So that is worth noting too. Like, does the figure hold the weapons okay? Yeah, it looks like the phaser fits in his hand fine. You can see he has to hold it all the way up at the front there, but he can hold on to that. Tricorder is, of course, is another one that we want to test here. So yeah, it does look like he holds on to those accessories just fine. Since they're more like stylized from that vintage line, they almost do seem a little too big and clunky for the overall proportions on this newer figure. I like the charm of them being the same ones from the vintage line. But again, like a lot of the modern Playmate stuff, there's a total lack of paint, total lack of any decals and stickers. And I would assume that the reasoning cited would be like rising costs. I know that that's a thing right now, but it is still unfortunate that the vintage ones just had so much more going for them in the department of the overall deco and everything. All right, guys, it's comparison time. So here is a look at this brand new Captain Picard standing alongside the original vintage release from Playmates Toys. So you can see these two standing side by side. Really shows you what I was talking about with the difference in the proportions. The vintage plastic was a lot more solid and hefty, but it also was a lot more glossy than the new one here. The new one doesn't have near the shine that the vintage one did. And I don't know, I think this is really going to be up to you on what your preference is. I'm one of those guys that likes it when my toys look like toys, so I still find this original toy line very charming, but I also know that I have a lot of nostalgia tied to this, and sometimes that does affect your perception. So it's interesting looking at these two side by side and seeing the differences. And honestly, I think that says it all for my overall opinion on this. Like, the vintage line is awesome, but I'm very nostalgic for it, and I love how toyetic the whole thing really felt. These new figures are nice. I don't hate this by any means. In fact, I ended up liking this better than I thought it would, but there are some quirks about it, and I just don't find it quite as charming as the original releases from Playmates Toys. Now, again, I feel like this is all going to come down to your personal preference, and I'm really interested to see how far Playmates takes this. I don't know if this is a line I personally will be diving into, but it's neat to see them kind of doing different eras of Trek as well. There are 3 figures from Next Generation currently on shelves with Picard, Riker, and Data, but they're also doing figures from the newer series Discovery, as well as the original Star Trek series, and maybe there will be more on the way. It'll be interesting to see just how deep they go with this new iteration. So there you guys go, a look at the brand new Playmates Toys Star Trek Captain Jean-Luc Picard. I found mine hanging on store shelves at Target, though they did fly off shelves rather quickly, so I don't see these around too much, but I do think they're trickling into Walmarts now as well. So definitely stay focused on the toy aisles. You never know what's going to be popping up during the holidays, during this time of year, and see if you can track some of these guys down for yourself. Thank you guys so very much for watching, and until next time.